name's John. I'm with Armada Engineering. We're here today with Method race wheels, and we're going to give you guys a few tips and tricks on installing a beadlock at home. Most likely, you don't have access to a tire machine or a full race shop or anything like that, so you're going to be doing this in your garage. So I'll walk you through kind of the basic tools that you're going to need, and then we'll go step by step on how to put a beadlock on a rim. The first thing you're going to want to do is lay out all of your tools. I have here a big piece of carpet. Normally we use for sheet metal, but a piece of cardboard or another piece of carpet, anything like that will be good working surface. That way when you set the rim on the ground, you won't be scratching it and dinging it all up. As far as tools go, you're going to need a torque wrench that has the ability to have a pretty low setting, and then a specialty tool you're going to need here. You can pick one of these up at just about any hardware store, tool shop, anything like that. This is your valve stem installation tool, and they're pretty cheap, pretty easy to come by. A nice ratchet will be handy, something that maybe you can fold over like this, has a speed handle, because you're going to have quite a few bolts to put in these rims, and so a nice speed handle will be kind of convenient when you're going through. Rounded end screwdriver, we use this actually for Zeus buttons, but at home I have one that's kind of similar. It's just an old screwdriver. It's got kind of a rounded end, something that won't scratch up your rim, be kind of nice to it. We'll use this later when we're actually setting the tire, the secondary bead onto the rim itself. I like to have a Sharpie handy, so as I'm going around the rim and I'm setting or torquing the bolts, I can mark them as I go. That way I don't get lost, miss one, or anything like that. You're going to want some anti-seize to put on those bolts. The last thing you want to do is snap a bolt head off or something like that when you're trying to take these things apart at a later date to change wheels or something like that. Here you have the bolts that are going to come with your rims. And then I also like to grab some that are just a little bit longer. Sometimes just to help line it up as you're going down, make sure it stays square, make sure it goes all in the right holes and things like that. It's just kind of nice to have. With these 105s, you're probably not going to need that, but just as a helpful hint, kind of nice to have. You can pick them up at any hardware store. And then last but not least, you'll need to pick up some valve stems to put in each one of the rims. You're going to need obviously 4. And then what I like to do when I'm installing the wheel and pushing the wheel over the rim is have some sort of a lubricant. I prefer soap and water. Any dish soap will work real good. Be pretty liberal with it, make it nice and soapy, nice and slick. I have used things like Windex and stuff like that in the past. What you want to stay away from is a lubricant that's going to stay, like a grease or something like that. You don't want that in the bead or anything like that. You don't want the rim slipping around. And then last but not least, we just have a bucket, and we're going to need that bucket to set the wheel up on top of when we go to actually set the beadlock ring and set that secondary bead. All right, so the first step in the process is we're going to have to put the tire and get the tire over the rim, just one, or the inside bead over the rim. So I mentioned earlier that we have some soap and some water, and this is where I say be liberal. Don't be afraid to soak everything. Make sure you got a lot of soap in there, because the soap will actually be the lubricant and then it'll dry up later. So what I like to use, just a rag, swish it around in there. I've already got some soap and water mixed up in here. And then we're just going to go around the rim and make sure the rim, you can see the bubbles forming. So that tells you I got quite a bit of soap in there. When we do it on the tire itself, it'll actually dry pretty quick, so you got to kind of keep it handy and make sure you're adding it as you go. All right, so now we're ready to actually set the tire onto the rim. And one tip is to make sure that you have the white wall in or the white wall out, whichever side you decide to run on your car. Your car's going to look kind of funny if you mess that up. You got a couple white walls out and a couple white walls in. All right, so now we've got the tire on top of the rim. This is where we're going to push the first bead down over the edge of the rim. It's probably the most difficult part of the whole process. you gotta kind of stand up on the rim and get it to pop over. Make sure that you got a wall that you're next to hold on to, or a buddy. Sometimes it actually does take two people to do it, but just make sure that you're stable enough that when the bead does go over the edge of the rim, that you don't go tumbling off and hit your head or something like that. All right, the next step of the process, now that we've got the first bead over the edge of the rim, as I mentioned earlier, we have a bucket set aside. This one's actually full of some oil, so it's kind of nice. It's a little bit heavier, a little more stable. But we're gonna set the wheel and the rim up on top of that, and you'll see why in just a second. All right, now that we got the tire up off the ground, there's a key thing that we need to do here that you can't forget. This is the time to install your valve stem. The reason we didn't do it before is because when you push that tire up over the rim, we don't want to hang it up or anything like that as we're going over the valve stem. So we're going to lift the tire up here a little bit. We're going to soap this up real good, and then we're going to pull it through. And then we'll move on to putting the beadlock ring on after that. All right, so what we're going to have Wally do here is he's going to pick up the edge of the tire, and then I'm just going to slide my hand in there. And then I have a little pair of pliers here I'm going to grab it with. Nice and gently, you don't want to mess up the rubber on that. The reason I'm doing that is I got to screw my valve stem tool onto it, and I need kind of a positive grip. It's a little soaped up. You screw it all the way down there. Then you just yank it through, give it a good wiggle. You'll feel it come through there. And you want to give it a little wiggle kind of around because it's got an edge on there, and you want to make sure that that edge comes clean all the way through and forms a nice seal. That's all there is to it. All right, the next step of the process is to put our second bead on. And the key thing here is, if you notice on the tire, it's got kind of an edge right here. We want to make sure that that edge falls on the other side of the edge of the rim right here. So we're going to give it a nice good soap up, move it around, and then I'm going to take my screwdriver that I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to run it around the edge of the tire and make sure that that edge falls over before I put my beadlock ring on. Okay, so now that I've dried it off, you can see that that edge is nice and clean around that. You want to make sure that none of it is overlapping over this area where your beadlock is going to do. This is actually going to pinch this in there, and so you don't want to have variable surface all the way around here for it to do that, otherwise your tire won't seal. All right, so the next step in the process is placing your beadlock on top of the rim. There's a couple of key things here that I want to mention. The bolts that you're going to put in, you're going to want to put anti-seize on them. The reason being is if you ever go to take these out, you don't want any metal transfer. When metal transfers, it pulls threads with it, and you'll end up with a pretty big problem if you go to pull these back out at some time to change your tires. All right, so we'll just place a little bit on the edge of the bolt there. Place a washer down in there, make sure you do that. And then push the bolt through. I like to use the socket with a little extension. You want to start every one of these with your fingers. Do not start these with an impact wrench. Do not do any of that stuff, because the minute you start cross-threading one of these things, it's game over time, and you're going to have big problems. So I like to just use my fingers, get it started, and then use just a little socket with an extension or something like that, and get it going down in there. After you get your first one, the next thing you're going to do is go straight across. All right, now that you've got two straight across from each other, you're going to do exactly the opposite side. So we're going to go here, and we're going to go here. The idea is to get this thing going on as square as possible. So we'll do the next two exactly opposite of those. Down the first round of bolts, you're going to come into your second round. Make sure that you don't use a ratchet that has a super long handle or something like that. The torque spec on these is 20 to 25 pounds, and if you have a long enough ratchet, you can really do that with your hands. And you really want to set that with the torque wrench, not by hand. So just go ahead and use a regular size ratchet, snug them down, using the same crisscross pattern that we used before on the first round. Alright, so now that I've got the beadlock all sealed, all the way down and snugged up with the ratchet, now's the time you're going to want to take it off the bucket and put it down on the ground. The reason being is you don't want this thing flopping around while you're trying to get an accurate torque setting. I've gone ahead and set my torque wrench to 22 foot-pounds, and we're going to run it around at 22 foot-pounds. So now that I've captured all of them, or at least I think I have, the best thing to do is start from one side and just go on each one all the way around. Make sure you capture every single one. Alright, what you want to do is get the jack dangles out, pour it on the inside of the tire, light your cigarette, if you're done, flip the match, go up inside the tire, boom, you set. Alright. Last step in the process is to set the bead. Make sure that you leave the tire sitting kind of like this. The reason being is when that bead pops on the back, it can be a little bit violent. You don't want your fingers or your clothes or anything like that getting hung up inside it when it does that. It pops over, you know, it's a big steel belt, and you're going with some pressure, and be some pretty serious ouches if you got your fingers up in there. So just go ahead and take your air compressor and put it on the edge of the valve stem and go full there. There it goes. Alright, last thing you want to do, make sure you set your final tire pressure, make sure your valve stem goes on there, and then, you know, these tires are for off-road use only, they're not DOT tires, so you're going to be out running through some pretty heavy stuff. Make sure that you torque these things after the first 50 miles, and then come back and re-torque them every 200 after that. You know, in the racing industry, we like to do it before we go out on any race or anything like that. So make sure you deflate the tire before you do that so you get a more accurate setting on your torque wrench. Make sure you don't have any accidents or anything like that. But once you do that, just make sure you have regular maintenance and care on these things. You know, these tires are going to see some pretty heavy stuff, and you want to make sure you take care of them.